Oxford University professor and historian, Dr. Margaret MacMillan.
Very much to the organizers for inviting me to take part in this very interesting conference. I'm an historian, and so we always go back. And I'm going to go back to the Roman Empire. This will take a while. All I want to do, really, is look back and say that where history can be helpful is in helping us think about the present. It can help us understand how we got here. It can help us understand ourselves and understand others, understand those with whom we're dealing. And I think most importantly, history can help us ask questions, because if we don't ask good questions, we don't have much hope of finding any sort of answers. And so history I see as a guide. I see it in very simple terms, like the sorts of signs that you see on a road when you're driving too fast and it says, be careful, there's a very bad curve ahead. I think history can do that for us. It can help us to look at the future with at least some idea that we might be able to ask sensible questions about it and perhaps be cautious when we need to be cautious. And so I want to actually say a little bit about the early days of the Roman Empire, but only because I think it has parallels in our own time. And I also want to say a little bit about the period before 1914, which is a period I've come to know as an historian quite well, also because I think it says something possibly about our times. And I think what's important about both those periods, and we can all think of other periods as well, which echo today, what's important is they were periods of transition. They were periods when people, for various reasons, were discontented and worried about the present setup, periods in which there were dramatic political and social and economic changes, and certainly in the case of the period before 1914, a period which ended with a catastrophic war. That did not happen to the late Roman Republic. It suffered a series of civil wars, and I think partly because of that, the Romans decided that they would put their faith in a single emperor. And the emperor and his successors brought, on the whole, a period of stability to the Mediterranean world, which lasted for almost half a millennium. And so periods of transition need not end in catastrophes, but the First World War certainly was a catastrophe after 1914. I want to talk just about some of the issues I see today, which I do see echoes of in the past, or resonances of in the past. And one of those issues, it seems, facing us today is globalization and, I think, more importantly, its discontents. We've all been so thrilled with the speed of globalization, the way in which it has linked the world together in so many ways, that I think we're now realizing that there is another side to globalization, that not everyone wins with globalization. Not everyone likes the effects of globalization. And I think this is reflected in the ways in which people are now seizing on smaller identities, seizing on national identities, or seizing on local identities. I think in some cases this is a reaction to a sense that the world is changing too quickly. And it was very much like this, both in the times of the early Roman Empire. One of the discontents in Rome was that there were too many foreigners coming in, too many people coming in with strange food and strange ideas. And Rome itself, the city, was changing. People no longer, we see it in the ancient literature, no longer felt that it was their city. And I think we saw this happening very much before 1914. 1914, the period before 1914, was a period of huge movements of peoples around the world. And this was not always accepted, it was not always easy, and it was not always, there was not always a welcome for these people who were coming from elsewhere, whether from Eastern Europe, from Asia, from Italy, from the British Isles. This was not an easy process. And I think what you saw also before 1914 was a reaction among those who were losing out to globalization. In those days, it was the small shopkeepers whose livelihoods were being undercut by the appearance of mass consumer goods, cheaply made consumer goods in mass department stores or mail-order goods. Small artisans were losing out because the things they were making could be made much more cheaply by machines. And so there were political parties before 1914 which drew on that discontent, often in the case of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, for example, anti-Semitic parties, because the Jews somehow got the blame for everything. The Jews were blamed for the excesses of capitalism before 1914. They were blamed for the changes in the world before 1914. They were also blamed for revolution. It seems that they were sort of catch-all group who could be blamed for anything that people felt uncertain and unhappy about. And I think That's a danger today. I think some of the hostility towards migrants and refugees is a sense that these people are somehow to blame for what is going on in our world. I think the whole issue of immigration is one that was very much there in the early Roman Empire, very much there in the period before 1914, and it was tied to a worry that change was taking place too fast, that the nature of society was changing, that perhaps that change was too fast. We weren't somehow in control of it. Before 1914, there was considerable worry about speed in a very concrete and material sense. People worried about the new trains. They worried about the new metros. When the metro opened in Paris, there was a great deal of worry that people sitting on it would be going too fast and this would somehow jangle their nerves and do peculiar things to their internal organs. A warning which has actually proven to be true was also that pickpockets would love the French metro. Some things don't change all that much. But there was, I think, a concern that society was in some ways undermining the human race, what it meant to be human, that people were moving too fast, living too fast, they were no longer in touch with the natural world. And you see this discontent and unease in the period before 1914. And I think, in a way, we have something similar today. The enormous advances in the understanding of human biology, for example, the enormous advances in artificial intelligence, the possibility that we will be able to produce new or compound sorts of human beings within a couple of generations, perhaps never, but perhaps more quickly, is something, I think, which is unsettling us. The very notion of what it is to be human is being challenged in ways, I think, that a lot of us find make us very uneasy. Again, another parallel with the past, and again, you can go back to Rome, but you can see it also very clearly before 1914, is it seems to me that we do have a discontent, quite a widespread discontent around the globe, not everywhere, but certainly in significant parts of the globe, with our existing institutions. We somehow feel that they're not fit for purpose, that they're not fulfilling the pressures, the needs, the demands, the challenges that we are facing in our world. One of the things that led Romans to decide that they would rather have imperial rule than the Republic was simply a sense that the Republic wasn't working, that it wasn't producing long-term planning, it wasn't producing the sorts of things that the Roman populace needed. And one of the reasons, I think, that people accepted the shift to imperial rule was what the emperors did, for all their very many human failings, and they certainly had them, but what the emperors did was provide stability. They built roads, they built aqueducts, they built ports. Romans knew, and people throughout the Roman Empire knew, that they could travel easily. And so they were prepared in a way to bargain away or to give away some of their ancient rights in return for stability, peace, and prosperity. And I suspect that we have similar feelings today about our institutions, that they're not delivering the sorts of things we feel they should be delivering. They're not delivering equality, they're not delivering fairness. We're, I think, a lot of us conscious about the growing gap between the rich and the poor. And again, you could see that in the late Roman Republic, and you could certainly see it in the period before 1914, a sense that society was leaving too many people behind, that the gaps between the rich and the poor were growing too great. I think what we are also sensing today, and again, you can see it in other periods, is a feeling that we can't trust our own elites. I mean, one of the worrying things, I think, and I think you see it in Europe, and I think we're seeing it in the United States at the moment, is a sense that those who have been running government or have been in bureaucracy or have been running business aren't sort of people we should trust. Really what I find worrying is the increasing contempt and disdain for democratic politicians, the sense that they aren't really very effective or they're only in it for themselves. And this cynicism, I think, is corrosive of democratic institutions. You can understand some of it, but I think it is very, very dangerous in the long run. What again we're seeing, and again we've seen it before in history, is that coupled with this cynicism and this lack of faith in our own institutions, what we're seeing is the spread of radical ideas and radical alternatives. Because if you feel a discontent and you feel that your system as you see it isn't working, if you feel that economic forces are not being properly harnessed or they're being used in the wrong sorts of ways, or they're producing the sorts of results which society doesn't want, then I think you do turn often to increasingly radical alternatives. And certainly in the period before 1914, there was a massive spread of socialist ideas, more worrying perhaps because many of the socialists eventually got incorporated into European structures and into European politics, but more worrying, I think, was the spread of radical ideas like terrorism, like anarchism, as we have today the spread of radically inspired religious ideas, which simply said destroy the lot. There is no point even trying to work with what exists. There's no point in thinking of evolution. What we need is something radically new, and we all know what that led to. Finally, I think what we have that is very worrying, and I'm sure you'll all have a longer list than I'm going to give you here, is that there is, I think, a growing sense in our world that there are certain countries or certain forces that no longer want to play by the accepted rules. I think the actions of Russia recently have been very worrying because it's not at all clear that the Russian leadership sees in any way itself working with other international forces or other international players. This may be wrong, this may be a perception, but it is something I think that a lot of us are concerned about. And I think before 1914, one of the things that helped to weaken the European order and helped to make the First World War possible was that certain key players no longer felt like abiding by the rules. Perhaps the first was Italy, which in 1912 broke a long-standing understanding that the European powers would not attack the Ottoman Empire, and in 1912 did precisely that. And that was followed, certainly in its thinking, by Austria-Hungary, the massive and shaky empire in the center of Europe, whose leadership more or less concluded that if other nations don't play by the rules, if Italy faces no penalties for having attacked the Ottoman Empire and seized its territory, why should we? And I think that is part of the thinking which led Austria-Hungary to decide to try and destroy Serbia in 1914, with results that we all know for the world. And I think that is worrying. I find it concerning also that China, which has always been, at least since the 1970s, a country which has followed rules, which has very much been interested in rules-based international order, now seems to be bending the rules to suit itself. And the international system can take a certain number of players who won't abide by the rules, who won't work with others, but too many, and the whole system begins to collapse. On the more positive side, to be slightly optimistic, I do think we have a much stronger international order than we had in 1914 or indeed in 1939. We have more institutions, we have more ability, we have more practice in working together. We have not just huge overarching international institutions such as the United Nations, but we also have a much thicker international system with a proliferation and an increasing network of all sorts of institutions, which I think have helped to link the world together and helped to at least deal with conflict in very productive ways. But we shouldn't assume that international order is going to last forever. It is under tremendous strain at the moment, and we see in Europe the tremendous challenge being faced by the refugee crisis. And so we shouldn't assume that the institutions which we have got used to will be here forever. And so I suppose if I want to conclude on any sort of note at all, it is a warning against complacency about where we are. In 1914, so many people didn't think that a war could come because they had survived previous crises. When the Archduke was assassinated in Sarajevo, the reaction around Europe among policy-making elites, but also among ordinary Europeans, was, this is sad, sad for his children, a blow to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but it's another crisis in the Balkans, and we've just been through 3 or 4 of them, and it all ended all right. There was a lot of talk of war, there was a lot of brinkmanship, and then it was over. And I think that complacency is very, very dangerous, because what it meant was that when the crisis boiled up, people were not prepared to take it seriously until it was too late. It took Europe 5 weeks, which isn't a very long time. It took Europe 5 weeks to go from the assassination on the 28th of June, 1914, to the outbreak of a general European war on the 4th of August. And all the way along, countries such as Britain, for example, kept on saying, don't worry, we can negotiate. This is just the usual sort of thing. This time it wasn't usual. It is all too easy to go over the brink if you're really not paying attention. And so if I want to leave any sort of final word, it's a warning against complacency, about thinking this will be all right. And although this may sound odd coming from a Canadian, it's a warning against being too smug. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President of the German Marshall Fund of the United States, Dr. Karen Donfried.
Welcome. It's wonderful to have all of you here for Brussels Forum. As you know, this is the 11th annual forum, and I have a wonderful team at the German Marshall Fund of the United States to thank for pulling all of this together. And as important as wonderful speakers like Margaret MacMillan, it's all of you in the audience who make the forum how special that it is. And therefore, a very warm welcome to all of you in the room for taking the time to be here. And we're looking forward to having all of you engage actively over these next 3 days. There are a lot of familiar faces in the audience, a lot of friends, but there are also a lot of you who are here for the first time, which is something we strive for. And I look forward to getting to know you over the weekend and hope that you'll all actively engage in the conversation. I want to give a special welcome to our congressional delegation. We have Senator Shaheen, who actually is mic'd up in the back because she's on the opening plenary. We have Senator Sessions, and we have Congressman Mike Turner here as well. This is an election year in the U.S., as some of you may be aware. So we're particularly grateful to these senators and our member of Congress for taking the time to be here. Margaret, that was an incredible introduction, and I think to have that steeping in history to help us understand the challenges that we have today, and your comment about, let's not be complacent, also makes clear that we're not just victims of this, but that we have our own agency, and we should take advantage of that and try to shape the world around us and not just be shaped by it. And I think that's going to be an important message for all of us over the weekend. In the same way that we asked Margaret to set the stage for the weekend and help us think about this current situation that we've described as beyond disorder in the program that you have, we are trying to introduce this sort of intellectual framing more broadly to Brussels Forum. And so over the course of the weekend, you're going to be hearing from Nick Gowing and from Robert Kaplan, who are going to come in at various points and try to connect this narrative over the conversations of the weekend, whether they're conversations here in this plenary hall, whether it's in the night owl sessions, the breakout dinners, or the gala dinner that we'll have tonight at the Beaux-Arts. And the hope is that Nick and Robert will weave throughout the weekend some of the lessons learned from the conversations that we'll have. You may remember, those of you who were here last year, that the theme was, we had a revolution, and it was talking about the monumental shifts that have accompanied our own evolution as Brussels Forum over a decade. And so this year, we moved from that theme of revolution and evolution to emphasize this world beyond disorder. We think the transatlantic relationship has moved beyond trying to solve and prevent global crises to working increasingly to manage the ramifications of unprecedented events that we on both sides of the Atlantic are dealing with, both within our countries but also beyond our borders. Now, when I look at the agenda over the weekend, it can be a little sobering, and your comments, Margaret, are also sobering. But the hope is that by bringing together this collective group, that we'll also come up with some solutions to the challenges that we're facing. And that's what I want us to keep in mind over the weekend. Let's not just be overwhelmed by the challenges, but try to focus on what are some of the solutions that we collectively could put in place to manage those challenges. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to be convening in lots of different places, in the plenary hall, in the night owls, in different venues. And I want to encourage all of you to take advantage of the many opportunities. And we try to not allow you to sleep at all at Brussels Forum. So the idea is that at all moments of the day, you can be engaged in interesting and thought-provoking conversation, and that you'll help create some of that new thinking as we try to move forward a strategic vision for the transatlantic community that challenges the status quo and also opens up new ways to bring ideas and communication on both sides of the Atlantic. Now, all of this, beyond relying on an amazing set of colleagues at GMF, relies on an equally amazing set of partners that we have at Brussels Forum. And I want to begin by thanking our founding partner, Daimler, and the federal authorities of Belgium, who've been with us for the whole 11-year ride, as well as our strategic partner, Deloitte. And those three have really been so critical to us. We also have a set of wonderful associate partners, the Asan Institute, the Brussels Capital Region, the Latvian Ministry of Defense, NATO, and the Wilfried Martens Center. We're also very grateful to the set of dinner partners that we have this year. Now, if you have any issues, needs over the course of the weekend, the fantastic Brussels Forum team that you've already met when you came in and at various other places in the Steigenberger stands ready to help. So don't hesitate to reach out to any of my colleagues over the course of the weekend. And for those of you who embrace social media, we want to encourage you, beyond interacting on BF Connect, to use our Brussels Forum hashtag, which you'll be surprised to know is Brussels Forum. It's pretty easy to remember. So use that hashtag on social media and let folks outside the hotel know some of the things we're talking about as well. Now, my last duty right now is to introduce our fantastic next speaker. We are very delighted that we have the President of the European Parliament, His Excellency Martin Schulz. It's a particular pleasure because it is the first time we have Martin Schulz here at Brussels Forum. I couldn't be more delighted. Let me welcome you to the podium.
Guten Tag, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the warm welcome, and let me start by saying this is first time for me, and so also an exceptional honor for me to be with you today. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, things in Europe aren't easy. Yesterday and today, the European Council had to discuss again about migration. We keep on looking for solutions and good compromises among ourselves and with neighboring countries like Turkey. But time is running out. First of all, for the refugees. But time is also running out for keeping a positive mindset and the spirit of cooperation. People have lots of worries and fears these days. The fear that their culture and identity will get lost when too many people with a different background settle down in Europe, in the member states, in your region, in your city. Or they fear that foreign trade will undermine our food safety and even our social structures. Fear is elsewhere in Europe, but looking to the presidential debates in the United States, I think fear is also elsewhere in the United States of America. When I listen to the public debate or to the political rhetoric from across the Atlantic, I don't get the impression that there is much understanding for what Europe is going through. To the contrary, I see similar tendencies of refocusing on national issues and self-interest. The idea that you can stop migration by building walls was already practiced on the American-Mexican border long before it became an issue in Europe. And when I hear about the difficulties to get the Trans-Pacific Free Trade Agreement through Congress, it seems that fear of trade effects is not specifically European. Ladies and gentlemen, let me be frank. A transatlantic blame game does not bring us anywhere. We are all in this together, and we have to find a way out of here together. This is also true for our economies. The American narrative that Europe is on the demanding side for a transatlantic trade and investment partnership because our economy hasn't recovered that well from the financial crisis and because geostrategic threats from Russia or China should pressure us in strengthening the Western partnership is not a valid one. TTIP should be judged on its own merits, and should be balanced and comprehensive in the interest of both parties, as was intended from the outset. I have been among the early defenders of a good and balanced trade agreement between the United States of America and the European Union. I have always looked at it as a chance to guarantee high standards and employment in a globalizing world. And I have helped bring about concrete steps to move the negotiations towards positive solutions. I have supported initiatives to give members of the Parliament access to negotiating documents on which Commissioner Malmström, who will be here tonight, has been very forthcoming. And I have fought for a new system of investor-state dispute settlement. It is in our Parliament's resolution of the 8th of July last year. Again, I have to say that Commissioner Malmström has delivered on this point. I have told people who criticized TTIP for all kinds of reasons that have little to do with its actual content, that they should not be led by fear or negative feelings, but make a factual assessment. And I can assure you that it was not an easy thing to do in view of the negative feelings people have about the United States, for instance, because of the surveillance activities by the American Secret Services. But defending TTIP becomes really difficult when no concrete results on the content can be shown. And according to what I hear, this seems to be the case. Speaking about investor-state dispute settlement, Commissioner Malmström has proposed a completely new system which takes account of all the worries expressed. There will be transparent procedures, real judges, protections for the right of governments to regulate, and an appellate mechanism. This could be the new world standard for investment protection. It has already been included in the EU-Vietnam trade agreement, and just a few weeks ago, the Canadian government of Justin Trudeau has been open-minded and willing to include it in the CETA agreement, and this even after formal negotiations had ended. Why can't the United States show a similar open-mindedness? Looking at other concrete topics, why is the United States eager to accept cutting 97% of all tariffs to increase its market access to the European Union, but can't make a substantial offer for opening its own public procurement markets? Why is it insisting on Buy American? And how do we explain to European farmers who are in a fragile economic situation for many years now that we would open our markets for American agriculture products, but no, protect their specific regional products like Parma ham or champagne? Or how do I explain to citizens who have suffered from the financial crisis that the United States don't want to include a chapter on financial services in a future TTIP agreement? Ladies and gentlemen, if by the end of this year there is no substantially more on the table than what seems to be the case now, I don't see how the negotiations can be concluded. Or if they would be concluded on that basis, I don't see how such a reduced and unbalanced TTIP would pass a vote in the European Parliament, and even more riskful, in one of the 42 national parliaments where the agreement has to be ratified. Therefore, I urge our American counterparts to come with better offers on TTIP and to show us that they also want a genuine economic partnership. True partnership, ladies and gentlemen, is built on understanding, patience, and the will to find joint solutions. Only in this way can we overcome differences and ally people's fears. TTIP started as a positive perspective and has turned into a negative uphill battle. We can still restore trust in TTIP and in government in general by showing tangible results. I therefore hope we can build true partnerships, first within Europe, then across the Atlantic on the basis of shared values and democracy, and finally with other countries in the world. I know what I offer here is not the most optimistic perspective. And therefore I add, we have to fight for a successful agreement. And this is an appeal to our American partners, those who want to bring TTIP through the European Parliament need the cooperation with the United States. If the two biggest democratic areas in the world, with their economies, Europe, the European Union, and the United States would join on the basis of shared values and interests, defending their model against those who are competing with us by in no way respecting our fundamental standards and rights, and consider themselves as more competitive because they don't respect social standards, they don't respect environmental standards, they don't respect human rights. If those who don't respect our values and standards are therefore more competitive than we are lost. Therefore, it is to defend our model of democracy based on shared values necessary to join our economic capacity. That's the reason why we are fighting for TTIP, and that's the reason why I appeal to our American partners to be prepared for more constructive cooperation with the European Union. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, President Schulz. You always give an honest and heartfelt defense of your position, and I am delighted that President Schulz has agreed to take a couple of questions. You threw down the gauntlet pretty clearly to the Americans in the room. We need to put a better offer on the table for TTIP. I will say that Mike Froman, the U.S. Trade Representative, very much was hoping President Schulz would be able to be part of the conversation he'll have with Commissioner Malmstrom, and now I know why. But unfortunately, the President has to be in Aachen. So, okay, I'm sure you delivered this message in person. But who has a question for President Schulz?
Thank you very much, ladies.
Oh, I know, somebody is. Senator Sessions, thank you.
Well, I think a lot of people are becoming more nervous about grand visions and schemes that promise a lot and often don't deliver. I know there are a lot of things we could agree on. maybe we should just reduce this grandness. I'm not sure how the Trans-Pacific Partnership is going to come out in the Congress, and I think it's probably less than 50-50 chance there. And it's an issue in the presidential election. I think all the leading candidates, the top 3 candidates in both parties are opposed to it. So maybe we ought to just step back a little bit, not create commissions, and just have some trade agreements on things that all of us could agree would benefit Europe and the United States.
The debate started half a year ago if what Mike Froman called the TTIP light would not be better than that comprehensive approach. But I think a TTIP light would get even less chances to be ratified on the European side. After all our arguments, I repeated it just, that we need in that globalized world a more comprehensive cooperation between the United States of America and the European Union is a convincing argument. And we convinced a lot of people, and I can't see how I could now go to these people and tell them, okay, because we can't realize such an ambitious project, let's deal with smaller items like ham and eggs. I doubt that this is successful.
Okay, so don't lower ambitions, but Americans deliver more. Okay.
Thank you very much. Zbigniew Pisarski, Kazimierz Pulaski Foundation from Poland. Mr. President, a simple question, because you mentioned a deadline that if there won't be progress with negotiations until the end of the year, that you don't see it, that you don't see TTIP. But what if there will be Brexit in the middle of it? What with TTIP then?
Yeah.
Those simple questions, it starts that way, and they're never simple.
This is really not a nice question. Whatever I say, whatever my answer will be now, this is look. I hope that the majority of voters at the end of the year about such an ambitious partnership agreement and the United Kingdom would not be a part of it. This is unthinkable normally. Therefore, I'm grateful for your question so that I can make an appeal, stay in to be a part of TTIP.
Deftly handled. I'm now going to come over here. We have a question over here. And I should say, I should have had, yeah.
So the examples that I'm Corey Shackey from the Hoover Institution. The examples that you used all suggested that Europe's trade agreements with Vietnam, with Canada, with others would be the standard setter. Are you not worried, though, that the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership, representing as it does so many dynamic economies, might become, unless the Transatlantic Trade Partnership moves much more quickly than you suggest, which is likely to require compromise by Europe, not just by the United States? Are you not worried that if the Trans-Pacific one outpaces it by a lot, that it will become the standard setter, and Europe will then have to adapt to the standards that are set by a trade agreement it's not a party to?
Very interesting question. If you listen carefully to my speech, you saw that I tried to touch on that question by raising the Trans-Pacific Partnership agreements. To bring that through the Congress seems to me not as easy as it sounds. There is a lot of resistance there. But I repeat, we on the European side try to convince reluctant people, and there is a lot of reluctance in the European Parliament, with the argument that the two big democratic parts, the United States and the European Union, with constitutional structures basing on the defense of fundamental values of our citizens, should get together to protect their system based on values against those who are, I repeat, perhaps more competitive because they don't respect what we consider as unavoidable guarantees, as absolutely necessary guaranteed values, rights and standards for our citizens, be it environmental, be it social, be it individual. And some of the Trans-Pacific Partnership partners, I'm very prudent, perhaps have a slightly different view on that society than we have. And therefore, if I should tell to Europeans, vote for low standards in a relationship with the United States because the trendsetters will be those on lower standards in the Pacific, you can be sure you will not win a majority for that agreement. And I know that question, but if they are the trendsetters, don't we have to follow? The European Union should be self-confident enough to consider that our 500 million inhabitants strong single market is one of the strongest in the world, and those who want to get access to our market, like the United States of America, but like also a lot of other Trans-Pacific partners of the United States should respect our standards when they want to get access to our market.
President Schulz, thank you so much. It was really an honor to have you here. I appreciate your speaking to what is the proactive transatlantic project, TTIP, and let's see if we can get it done together. But please do join me in thanking President Schulz.
Thank you, man.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from CNN and the Daily Beast, Ms. Kim Dozier.
Program. It's called A Grave New World. That is not a misprint. It wasn't supposed to be a brave new world, but a grave new world. And before Kim invites her panel up, we do have a short video that we wanted to share with you. So we'll go to that first.
In an increasingly interconnected world, today's transatlantic security challenges are multifaceted, widespread, and dynamic. Ongoing instability in the Middle East and North Africa, destabilization in West Africa, Russian aggression in Eastern Europe, and simmering tensions in South and East Asia all serve as palpable examples of this new reality. With many emerging crises taking place on Europe's doorstep, questions of security and instability represent a greater portion of transatlantic dialogue today on local, national,